Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's finally here, and it only took me 2.5 weeks longer than I wanted it to. My review of the complete first season of Reboot, The Guardian Code. This is Saturday Morning Fever.
From now on, like your parents were, you are the secret force of Hollywood.
They're moving real fast, they're the only one who can get there on time. They're never too far behind, they're always fighting crime. Undercover or facing adventure in the danger zone. Pretty soon they'll be off on a mission. Come and watch them go. Sun doesn't shine when the houses stand show. Sun doesn't shine when they're on the road. Sun doesn't shine to sit back and watch them go.
Welcome to Saturday Morning Fever, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you guys who are tuning in for the first time, or the surprising hundreds of you who only tune into my channel for Reboot content. I don't know when I became the Reboot guy, but I'll take it. Know that I do other stuff on this channel. This is Saturday Morning Fever, my mainstay show on this channel, where as much as possible, I try to make reviews and commentaries on things that are going on in Saturday morning cartoons, and also review cartoons that I really like. My channel got, quote-unquote viral with a couple thousand views, which is big for me, when I did my first reaction to Reboot the Guardian Code, the original trailer. And I had some mostly negative things to say about it. It didn't make the best first impression on me. But there's a lot of people who really stood up for it. Some people who stood up for my admittedly mean comments about the original Reboot show, which I still think is a bit of a show of its time, but I admit that the later seasons do hold up a little bit better than the old stuff did, which is mostly what I watched. But there was a lot of really heated debate over this idea ever since it was originally announced. The idea of the reboot has been in talks among nerd spheres for a long time. And the idea that we were eventually going to get this version, this sort of Code Lyoko / Power Rangers live-action reboot of Reboot, was something that was met with a lot of controversy by a lot of people. And so the question ultimately lands, is this show any good? I think so. But is the show also very flawed? I definitely think so. So let's break it down. What's the good? What's the bad? What's the in-between? Let's dive in. On the positive side, I really like the animation for the most part. I like the way the show looks on the broad stroke. I think that in the live-action segments, the camera work is all really solid, and the color correction, which is a weird thing to comment on, in the main world is really cool. I like the color palette it gives. It's bright, it's colorful, it pops, it's good. In the CGI world, admittedly, I wish they would have had a wider variety of creatures for them to fight or to interact with. And as the show goes on, without giving major spoilers, they improve in that regard quite a bit. The designs of the Guardians, I think, could have been better. Megabyte's design grew on me. But I feel like the old show is definitely getting its fan service here. I feel like they're just trying to use cleaner-looking modern polygons, but still keeping that very polygonal early CGI look to the show as a whole, which I think is very much in their interest. They definitely chose art style over fidelity, and I think that is the proper choice in this regard. The writing is something I go back and forth on a lot in this show, because at times it's really funny because they're trying to be cheesy, and other times it's funny and I don't know if they're trying to be cheesy. I think part of that is a demographic thing. The show is definitely made for somewhere between 10, 12, 13 year old audience, and I am not that. For record, I am 27. So that's definitely interesting, because it's hard for me to evaluate that. But there are aspects where it very much is trying to be cheesy, and it is trying to get into that sort of sense of humor, and it executes it extremely well. As far as like teenage actors go, a lot of them do fine with the material. Some of them are a little bit more cringe than others. The character of Googs is one that I think that he struggles sometimes with being given the awkward nerd character, and sometimes playing it a little bit too strong or a little bit too light, and that kind of thing, working with those sort of cliches. At the same point, you originally get the perspective of the main female character, who is supposed to be this very, like, blogosphere kind of character, and she runs her own vlog, and that's, like, her big connection to technology, and that really never gets brought up again. Like, it's brought up, but it never really, like, defines her character in a way. Like, she's not a narcissistic person. It's just she likes to make web content, and she's really good at it. Vera is actually a character that I started out not liking at all from the trailers. This idea of this, computer in the real world, like, I am Vera, the virtual, But I loved her. She was my favorite character. Mainly because the execution of the actress was fantastic. She sells it in a way that you feel like you're laughing with her and not at her. Just normal enough that, given the suspension of belief of the world, that she doesn't, you wouldn't think she would completely blow her cover on, day one, which is nice. But also, as the show goes on, one of my favorite plot points overall is exploring more of the idea of whether or not Vera has a soul, and they do that non-directly, which I like. It's more of their broader discussions of, if you're in a show that talks about the idea of technology being a living thing, what does that mean for Vera as a person who appears in a human body? I find that really fascinating, and kudos to her actress, who was in for this show, and I really hope we if we do get more seasons, that we see a lot more of her. The other actors, like I said, they're hit and miss. As far as their, for actors of their age, they're fine. None of them gave me any big problems. And from that writing perspective, like I said, some of the technology stuff can be a little bit cringe, and some of it probably could have been a little bit tighter. When I originally heard them say the name Googs as the name of the character, I thought the G was a K. And for those guys who don't know why that would be a problem, a simple Google search will suffice. But maybe be a little careful about what sounds like random gibberish to you might sound like, racial slurs towards Vietnamese people to others. The main way that the cheesy thing does absolutely work, though, is with the idea of the Sorcerer, one of our main villains of the show, which is, you only see him in this environment of this cloaked, very stereotypical hacker who is just hanging out in the shadows and playing away on his keyboard and concocting his evil schemes and such. And he's so cheesy and he's so over the top. It's like, I shall defeat you, Guardians. He's kind of, it reminds me of Claw from Inspector Gadget, but a little bit on the funnier side. I love his character. Absolutely love his character. He's not really as threatening in actuality as I think they're supposed to make you think he is, but I think that might just be an age thing. Megabyte is also a really good villain. It's interesting seeing him, demoted to kind of the Starscream role, which I think is, a series-building thing. I think the intent of that is that we're seeing him in this role of being forced into this Starscream, second-in-command kind of character, so that we feel he's even more intimidating in later seasons if they make it, when he regains power. His design is a little bit more smooth and shiny than I'd like it to be, but I guess this is something that I adjusted to over time. Action-wise, for the most part, it looks nice, but I kind of wish that from episode to episode they were willing to change up the kind of stuff that they were fighting. We fight Sentinels a little bit too often for my taste, and I feel like we just needed more enemy types, more environments, more just cool stuff for us to play with. Episode by episode, our storylines are very Code Lyoko-esque. Evil thing in the digital in the real world, can only be stopped by transporting into the digital world of Reboot or Lyoko or whatever world you happen to be in, and then they have to stop the evil thing, so the evil thing in the real world stops and the sorcerer is defeated and blah blah blah, which is fine. And a couple episodes are definitely a lot better than others. Not to say that any of them are particularly bad, but there's about 2 or 3 episodes that I would say in the series that are just absolutely rock solid. And I feel like if the whole show could have been as good as those couple of episodes, then I think that things would have been... I would have had a much easier time doing a full recommendation of this show. So this is sort of my final impressions right here. We're going to have our cutoff, and then I'm going to do spoiler corner about my feelings on episode 10, because I feel like that episode in particular has a lot to say about where the series is going forward, and I think that deserves to be a separate video. So, putting all my thoughts together. If you're an old school Reboot fan, I suggest you check out this show. It's only 10 episodes. Watch one at a time. If you marathon it, sometimes you can see a little bit too many of the patterns that repeat between episodes, and that can be a bit of a pain. But all in all, it's a really solid show. I'm a little bit too old for it. I think that is why it might not come off as good of a show for me. That I would enjoy if I didn't have something like this. I watched it, but I feel like if I really liked the show, this episode probably would have came out, about a week and a half ago, rather than coming out now, because I was never truly compelled to really watch the whole thing, just bam, 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 bam. But as a thing that's hey, it's on Netflix. It's got some cool ideas in it. It's worth a look. I think that your mileage will vary. But if you are at all interested, I would suggest at least giving this episode a couple episodes to see if it gets your teeth sunk in. And if it's not really gelling for you, and you're not too concerned about the plot, just skip ahead to episode 10 and you'll thank me later. But yeah, that's my feelings on Reboot the Guardian Code. Did you like this review? Did you not like this review? What kind of stuff do you want to see on this channel? Feel free to leave your comments below, subscribe. I try to respond to as many comments as possible. All the links to my social stuff, to my book series, to my comic book, all that will be below. And keep an eye out for my specific separate review for Reboot the Guardian Code episode 10, which will be coming out soon. Take care.